We're now going to look at some official ways that we can classify living things. But before we go and look at that, we're going to look at the question of why do we even classify living things? Why is it important? Well, firstly, there are about 9 million different species on Earth, we think. Which means 9 million different types of living things. And we only actually know of about 1.5 million of them. So there are many more species still to be discovered. And with so many species, scientists need a way of organizing and grouping all of these living things so that it makes sense and that they're easier to know what we're talking about. So some other benefits of classifying living things is it makes them easier to find. So if we know what features a certain group has, then it's easier to look for that particular species if you're out in the wild. It also makes living things easier to describe because we can talk about particular features that a living thing has. So we know that a tree has leaves and it flowers and it has roots that go into the ground, and we can describe the common features. And a similar idea is it makes them easier to talk about. Especially if they have a proper name as part of their classification. So now we're going to look at one method that's really common for classifying or grouping living things. And it's called the 5 kingdoms, or the 5 kingdoms system. And what it does is it groups every living thing into one of 5 different kingdoms of life. And we're going to go through each of the 5 kingdoms now to talk about the features that they have in common. So we'll start off with every living thing. And one group of living things is the Kingdom Animalia, which is just the animal kingdom. And you might have heard of that term being used. So all the animals are in Kingdom Animalia. And features of animals are they're multicellular, which means their bodies are made of more than one cell, all grouped together. And importantly, they get their energy from other living things. Energy from other organisms. And they do that by eating. As humans, we need to eat to get our energy. The second common kingdom that you probably have heard of is the plants. And this is Kingdom Plantae. Every plant on Earth comes from this kingdom. And the features of plants, they're also multicellular, made of more than one cell, but they get their energy from the sun. They use photosynthesis and they collect energy from the sun and turn it into food. So they don't need to eat anything else. The third kingdom is Kingdom Fungi, which are anything that's a fungus, things like mushrooms and molds. You might see mold growing on bread at home. These are all fungi. Fungi can be just one cell, and they're really small microscopic fungi, or they can be multicellular. They also, like animals, need to feed on other organisms. They need to eat other things to get their energy. But they eat dead living things. They eat dead organisms. And we call that decomposers. They break down all the dead bodies, the dead leaves in an ecosystem. The fourth kingdom we'll look at is called Kingdom Protista, or the protists for short. And these are things like plankton in the ocean and algae that live in the ocean and in lakes and rivers as well. So protists, they all live in water. That's the one thing they have in common. And they can be single-celled or multi-celled. Things like seaweed is multi-celled, but it's still a protist. And they're usually microscopic. There's one more feature that we'll come back to, but we'll look at the last group first. And the last group here, the last kingdom, is called Manera. And the Manera are bacteria, which live all over. They live inside living things, they live in the ground. Bacteria are everywhere. And all bacteria are microscopic. They're only made of a single cell. We can see in this picture here. They can be different shapes, but they're all made of just one cell, each living thing. So the bacteria and the protists look quite similar. They're usually microscopic, but looking back at the protists here, we can see lots of smaller features inside their cells. So we can say that the protists have complex cells, whereas the bacteria are much more simple. They're the simplest type of life that we know.